You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Richard Knowles, financial consultant and wealth manager. He's from Knowles & Associates in Vancouver. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you, Jim.
A climatologist in Britain is saying that we might be in for 30 years of cold winters due to reduced sunspot activity. And we know that we've already had a huge cold snap go through North America. Are energy stocks something people should be looking at right now?
Based on cyclical patterns, that's a very typical kind of play. People will get into gas and oil, particularly now gas, of course, natural gas for a run, and oil, for that matter, I suppose, because you've got the winter coming on and there's more gas used, actually, when you talk about gasoline in your cars. There's more gas used when you've got your heaters on, of course, and driving through the winter climates that, take more energy, actually, out of a car, so they burn more gas. This is a very good time, cyclically speaking, to get into these, to that particular stock group and then sell it in approximately February, March, typically about around March. The cycle runs from now until March. The only thing that we have over top of this, although the cycle usually has an increasing value on oil and gas stocks, the problem with this sector at the moment is the fight for the battle for oil. Natural gas seems to be very stable. You could get into a natural gas play. But what I'm more concerned about is the oil side, because we've got the macro picture with Russia, and there seems to be this sort of evolving fight against the Russian winters. So to sort of freeze Russia in the siege, as we call it, on the macro picture, it seems that OPEC is willing to let their oil numbers slide. Just recent announcement by OPEC, which usually is the one, the Arab nations, to control the spigot on pricing. They said they don't want to have to bear this burden anymore, completely on their own, that is. They were the ones that were really driving the car before, and now they want to share the driving. So this was an interesting announcement they made. So in other words, there may not be they don't want really that control anymore. And while, we do anticipate they will probably turn down the oil production so that they can create a higher price, one wonders how that's going to play out on the macro sort of picture, geopolitical picture, because there seems to be a concert of efforts to try and freeze Russia out. And if that's the case, keeping their oil prices down, because Russia is such a massive producer of oil and they get so much of their income from it, by keeping the global price down, will hurt them financially as well. So there seems to be something going behind closed doors. I don't want to point a picture. I don't have any proof of it, but it just seems to be this very unusual dropping in price at exactly the same time that we've got this Russian issue overhang with the Crimea and Ukraine, and the side deals going with China, etc. There could be a U.S.-Arab deals, and they've been very cozy for many decades now. So there could be some backroom talking about how to, freeze them out, siege them a little bit. But, with that sort of overhang, I can't be as confident with the cycle, is my point. So I'm not exactly sure where that's going. But even if prices were to stay where they are, the likelihood is that the stocks will do okay because the demand for the oil and gas will increase. So the cash flow will increase enough that it would make a good cycle. I just don't think it's going to be one of the best cycles for oil and gas that we've seen. Mind you, extra cold winter is not going to hurt that particular cycle. I think it's good for Canada because we're a resource-based economy. So Canadian stocks should get a good bounce. And we'll get a good look at least a good-looking Toronto Stock Exchange index as well.
And of course, too, it's pointed out, consumers drive the U.S. economy. A 1 cent a gallon U.S. drop puts another $1 billion into the hands of consumers, and they've had a 65 cent a gallon drop. That's an extra $65 billion now that consumers have in their hands. Is that not good news for everybody on both sides of the border?
Yeah, but that sort of goes against, the oil and gas players, So, yes, while that, if you're going to go into that cyclical pattern, but you're expecting, you have two conflicting sort of philosophies here to make money, so to speak. One is to get into the oil and gas play cyclically, but on the flip side, if the governing bodies, if you will, if we could sort of keep this oil and gas pricing down, particularly oil for gasoline prices, then that will boost the economies so much, and this worldwide. I mean, if you can keep prices down in Europe, if you can keep them down in the UK and the Mediterranean, anywhere, because gas is cars and automobiles and transportation is such an amazing, an important part of all cost analysis. I mean, getting the bread from one part of the country to the other, for example, costs more, and therefore it's factored in the price of bread. If we can bring down these prices in transportation costs as well as for our own cars and getting to and from work, and we'll see prices reflected in many more places than just our own pockets. But, certainly it ends up being more in our own pockets, I should say. But in many more areas than just at the gas pumps, for example, we'll see lower fares in theory, lower fares in the buses, in the sky trains, in the subways, etc. All of these should be reflected as well, depending on if they're gas run, of course, and oil run. But at the end of the day, everything should drop in price while putting more into consumers' pockets. What actually happens, however, is more typically goes into the tax pockets and the tax revenue. So the price may slightly come down initially, but you may see adjustments within the structure if it's long term, so the price will go back to where it could be sustainable, less into consumers' pockets, but more into the tax revenues of our governments.
Well, if we're spending more, doesn't that mean more GST for the federal government?
I'm sorry?
If we're spending more as consumers, doesn't that mean more sales tax for governments?
Yeah, that's very logical, and we find that governments don't think logically. They think it's more like, what does this box return me? So if you look at it in the sense of having boxes in a room, this is more or less the way the government has run. Most governments run. They have boxes in a room, and each box has revenue or it does something. And they keep these boxes separate. They open each box, they look at it, they close the box, and they go to the next box. You see, they don't look at it as one big picture. That's a different type of logarithmic thinking that we find is not typically reflected in governmental thinking. Everything's separate.
Richard, I think the best example of that is BC Ferries cuts routes to save $750,000, but a survey by the Chilcotin tourist industry found they lost $4 million because of that $750,000 cut. And the BC government says, we're not going to put those ferries back on the route. So again, right there's a perfect example of a government putting things into boxes, but not seeing how those boxes connect.
Exactly. Well, it's a form of logic, which is what we call in economics or in mathematics or in any kind of philosophy. You look at it as simplistic logic. It's very logical to put things in separate boxes and measure them separately to see what their net effect is. But it's a very childlike, simplistic approach. Unfortunately, governments are indeed managed in that fashion. They're very childlike mentally, because the people that make decisions typically change too often. And because of that, you don't have a continuity of management. And that's going to be true whatever government you're with, and no matter how long the leader's there. To create an infrastructure which is too complex for the next, if you will, the next party or the next administrative group or the next leaders to look at, they'll simply dismantle it all and start all over. So what they typically try and do in governmental situations, and other corporations work like this too, in theory, is that you keep it a simple sort of formula. Okay, this is the simplest we can make it in this complex situation. And then we'll sort of embellish it along the way. But that way, when we go, our predecessors can look at it and figure it out. So it's what we call working towards the common lowest denominator. And it's unfortunate because it prevents truly innovative concepts being inclusive or included in the development of government thinking. So your point was that if you reduce costs in one area, you would therefore increase income in another, which was to increase the GST because spending would occur. The assumption, there's a number of assumptions to that, of course, where you would decrease, these people would get the money in their pockets, but they would automatically spend it. Well, that's not necessarily the case. They could actually put it into savings. And if they put it into the bank accounts and savings or paying down debt, that does not equate to GST. That does help the economy overall in the long run. So you might see the net effect in 5 years from now when people have less debt and therefore far more spending income. They can therefore spend lots more on things and therefore GST would increase. Definitely. Governments don't want that. They want to see the net effect today so that they can get voted in next year.
Well, a good positive effect, the federal government lowered industrial taxes. More companies have moved to Canada, and because of that, our tax revenue for the federal government is up because they cut taxes.
Absolutely.
So it can work, Richard.
Oh, absolutely. And within, as I say, these ideas are not alien to government thinking. I mean, there's high-end economists that are involved, and their advice sometimes is taken. But what I mean is that if it's outside of, if it's between boxes, let's put it that way. If the idea is in effect that if we do something with this box, then over in this box, this will increase. Your example is within the same box. And so that happens a lot. And then that's a very good thing to see. So the thinking is not alien to governments. And I don't believe that, they're complete morons or idiots, although that is questionable in some issues. I myself am a moron at any given point in the day. But the point is, at the end of the day, seems to be the way it is. If it's within the box, we can structure it and recalculate it, and it benefits that way. Yes, we think algorithmically, but only within this one box. They don't tend to cross boxes. They don't want to think long term. The old world, old Europe or old Asia or whatever. We're in the new world, but the old world thinking was to think multi-generationally. So what will our generations adopt? Well, we've lost that in our philosophy today. Our corporate thinking, our federal government thinking, our provincial thinking seems to quickly lose the concept of what it's going to look like in 20 years from now. It's as though once my tenure is ended in 3 to 5 years, I want to do as much as I can in 3 to 5 years as a leader of this country without thinking about the long-term effects of my decision. And this is the typical New Age way of thinking. It's unfortunate.
We'll have more with Richard Knowles right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking to financial consultant and wealth manager Richard Knowles. Richard, you always said you vote for what you like with your money. Well, we've seen some interesting decisions made because of people's feelings about the environment. For example, General Mills has dropped the word natural from its Nature Valley bars because they were caught using GMOs in it. Neil Young, noted musician, says he's not going to go to Starbucks for his morning charge anymore because he found out that Starbucks is defending GMOs. So people do vote with their bucks. Are there other examples of that you can think of?
Well, I think it happens every day, I mean, we go out and buy our foods relative to what's nutritionally good for us now rather than what tastes good, how much sugar. It used to be companies back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, once they got the idea that they added more sugar to something, people would buy it for their kids until the general population understood that sugar is poisoning their children rather than helping them. Hence our obesity rates have increased, et cetera, et cetera. When we discover that some chemical is involved, like monosodium glutamate or worse, aspartame, which is a historically dangerous additive. Now of course, they've discovered it, and the science is in, but because of certain laws, they couldn't stop them from going out. The irony to that is rather profound, and it's a great story for any of your listeners to look up. But regardless, now it's becoming more exposed. People make decisions, even though it's sold in a store, does not define it as safe. And consequently, once we learned that, we looked more carefully at what we purchased, and that's just simple food. And GMO is another simple food concept that has been accepted because Monsanto and other companies successfully were able to profess that scientific evidence showed, and yet they could never show the scientific evidence. So consequently, the governments, who are now plutocracies, and we know this from Princeton University, who just announced, it was a big, massive announcement, frankly, that stated that the government of the United States is not a democracy anymore. This is an official statement from Princeton University study. It is now, I believe, a plutocracy that they came to, or oligarchy. Plutocracy, I believe. It's corporate runs for the elite group of people. There's an elite group of wealthy people in a plutocracy are managing the business of the government. And that is very true. That's factually correct. Now, you can call it democracy if you wish, but they still vote. But the facts of the matter have been officially verified by a high-ranking university in the United States, like their own country. So consequently, we have this new system where we have to adopt the knowledge. Once you're aware of what's going on, you can then make decisions. So we're in a situation now where you have to vote with your dollars. It's the only true democratic process that we have left, where you buy your gas. Like, for example, why would you have a gas car at all? If you don't believe in gas prices, we're just talking about that. Some of the most important gas things in the world, cyclical gas prices. And yet, if you wanted to avoid gasoline, why don't you buy the new water cars? There's a hydrogen car now. There's a seawater car. Now the engines run on seawater. They have, of course, electric cars or hybrids where you can get rid of all of this. Vote with your dollars. Create your own world, and don't listen to the advertising rhetoric and marketing programs that are trying to control your mind. And that is the fact. They are trying to control your mind and make you decide to give them a benefit rather than someone next door. So consequently, you have to think for yourself. We have to get our head out of the sand and listen to and learn about as many things as we can so we can vote with our dollars much more efficient.
Richard, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Thanks. I appreciate being here.
My guest has been Richard Knowles of Knowles & Associates in Vancouver. If you have any questions for Richard, you can send them to Richard K, that's the letter K, at CustomPlanFinancial.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. We're also available on YouTube channel Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.